Alright guys, so in this video, I am going to be going over a little bit more of an in-depth look at the South Tower or 2 World Trade Center. Obviously collapsing, we're going to be talking about the way at which it collapsed and the angle at which it collapsed based off of where it was hit and how that influenced the overall structure and caused it to fall so fast, being hit at an angle on a side. Also being hit much more faster than the North Tower. And in this video, it's more so about how did it fall rather than the impact, because I've done videos talking about both the North and the South Tower, both of their impacts. So you can see with some of these initial images, the point of entry and how that point of entry in that hole creates a structural problem to where the building does collapse at an angle because there is a hole in the one side of it. Right near the entry hole on the South Tower, there are videos of the wall inverting and giving way to the upper structure, the upper floors, and there were more floors weighing down on the structure because it was hit lower. Now, when it comes to the internal data on the South Tower before the collapse, this is pretty much what we have. As the fires continued to burn, occupants trapped in the upper floors of the South Tower provided information about the conditions to 911 dispatchers. At 9:37 a.m., an occupant on the 105th floor of the South Tower reported that the floors beneath him in the 90-something floor had collapsed. The New York City Police Department Aviation Unit also relayed the information about the deteriorating condition of the buildings to police commanders. At 9:51, about 14 minutes later, 7 minutes before the collapse of the South Tower, the NYPD Aviation Unit reported that large pieces of debris were hanging or falling from the South Tower. The implied threat of an imminent collapse was sufficient for the NYPD to order its officers to evacuate, specifically predicted that either tower would fall. During the emergency response, there was little communication between the NYPD and the FDNY, and overwhelmed 911 communication between the two did not pass along proper information. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. Before the South Tower collapsed, 18 people escaped from the impact zone and the floors above. They made it out via Stairwell A, the only stairway left intact after the crash. So this is an interesting little factoid. There were 3 main stairwells within each building core, the North and the South Tower. The North had all 3 of them severed because it was hit directly in the middle. Because the South was hit at an angle and off to the side, there was one stairwell that was still usable, and it saved 18 people's lives. Interesting there. But the internal stuff, you can hear it being relayed that, yeah, this building is about to collapse. There were people within the South Tower telling 911 dispatchers the floors are collapsing. So a lot of the internal floors were collapsing on themselves even before the entire structure gave way within the South Tower, and there were people that knew it was going to go down. A lot of people, especially architects, looked at the South Tower and they said, we're concerned about that one. The North Tower, a lot of people thought it'd be able to stay up just because of the way it was hit, how high it was hit. But the South Tower, the off angle being hit lower, it was a major problem. The issue, though, when it comes to getting the firefighters out and everything like that, it's just such a mess, a complete mess of 911 calls. It's too much commotion to deal with in such a short amount of time, and the South Tower collapsed so quickly. It really became overwhelming, and you can see the probable collapse sequence for World Trade Center 2. Aircraft impact severed a number of exterior columns on the south wall from floor 78 to 84, and the wall section above the impact zone moved downward. After breaching the building's perimeter, the aircraft continued to penetrate into the building, severing floor framing and core columns at the southeast corner of the core. Fireproofing was damaged from the impact area through the east half of the core up to the north and east perimeter walls. The floor truss seat connections over about 1/4 to 1/2 of the east side of the core were severed on floors 80 and 81, and over about 1/3 of the east side perimeter wall on floor 83. Aircraft impact severed a few columns near the east corner of the north wall between floors 80 and 82. Impact damage to the exterior walls resulted in redistribution of severed column loads, mostly to the columns adjacent to the impact zone. The impact damage to the core columns resulted in redistribution of severed column loads, mostly on other intact core columns and the east exterior wall. The hat truss resisted the downward movement of the south wall and rotated to the east-west axis. As a result of the aircraft impact damage, the core carried 6% less gravity loads after impact, and the north face carried 10% less loads. The east face carried 24% more gravity load, while the west face and south face carried 3% and 2% more gravity load, respectively. So what that's saying is the core actually had less of a gravity load, and all of it got thrown onto the east based on the way the plane hit and the columns that it severed. After the impact, the core was leaning towards the east and south perimeter walls. The perimeter walls acted to restrain the core structure. And then when it comes to the collapse initiation, the inward bowing of the east wall induced column instability, which progressed rapidly horizontally across the entire east face. The east wall unloaded and tried to redistribute the loads via the hat truss to the weakened core. The entire section of the building above the impact zone began tilting as a ridge block as column instability progressed rapidly from the east wall along the adjacent north and south walls. The building section above impact continued to rotate to the east as it began to fall downward and rotated at least 20 to 25 degrees. So that is the angle at which the top of it fell. 20 to 25 degrees. You can see this based on, and this is why the whole idea of the building somehow, being blown up as the way they collapsed, that doesn't make any sense. The building fell from the impact zone. That's why it fell. There's a literal video of the impact zone inverting inward right as it's collapsing. It was caused by the impact zone. That's where it weakened. That's where it collapsed. If the thing was blown up, it would fall from the bottom, not from the impact zone. And that's why the impact zone, above the impact zone, the top of the South Tower came down at an angle. So this depicts a hanging floor slab, and you can kind of see it. Is that seriously a floor that's sagging down? That's a crazy image right here. You can see this is just the overall timeline. Right at 9:03, or technically 9:02 and 59 seconds, the airplane strikes the Second World Trade Center between the 77th and 85th floors. Impact followed by fireballs on northeast-south faces with brief period of intense burning. Just a minute later, floor 83 edge appears to be draped in floor 82 windows between columns 310 to 342. About 7 minutes later, floor edge appears to be draped through windows in cold spot towards floor 79 debris pile. And about 11 minutes later, east face columns are bowing inward. And then you can see the east face columns are bowing inward again, and the collapse begins right there. And this is the demand to capacity ratio before. So this is your standard, what it looks like every single day. You can see the center core, you can see the open floor plan, and you can see the outer walls. How is it all distributed? There it is. It's all beautiful, looks perfectly fine, and this is it after the impact. You can see where the impact is. You can see the stress that immediately gets thrown on to more of the columns right next to the impact, as well as columns right on the interior in the inner core, especially in the middle core, getting really stressed right here. Maximum elastic, plastic, and creep strain in columns between floor 78 and 84. And look at all that stress to the side of the building. Oh my goodness. This thing was done from the start. Examples of core column fireproofing: SFRM only, SFRM plus wallboard. SFRM, I believe, is sprayed fire resistive material. I should have screenshot what it was. I think that's what it is. But obviously, when you're talking about fireproofing, there was a recent video that came out that's gotten millions of views that talked about fireproofing saving the towers, or else they both would have collapsed pretty much immediately. But the fireproofing was able to kind of guard against the jet fuel and all the fires for a prolonged period of time. and it did effectively help save the towers for at least the time being. It's kind of like the idea of the Titanic with the watertight doors. It's able to stem it a little bit, slow it down, also the pumps, but only for so long. So guys, that is just kind of an in-depth look at the South Tower, the initiation of the collapse. That is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.